to be familiar or you have to be understand. So this question I can say I already appeared one of the very big good company, product based company and also service based company. So this question I seen over there, and that's why I was thinking if I share this experience to my family, and they will get also benefited from these questions, and that will be helping. So let's start with that. When we are using the API, we have some thought why we are using the first of all API, why we can't directly get the data from backends, why we are using the API. So the API means application programming interfaces. It is sit between the UI application and server to communicate between them, like front end to back end communication purpose. This API is going to be take a order and receiving and sending the request over there for proper communication, proper workflow of any application. Okay, so any application when we are designing in the API format, so what is the architecture for that? So right now we can see in the API we have a REST architecture style. There is a SOAP architecture also, but what is the more trending in the market we are using, that is the REST one. So the interviewer was asked what is the architecture style you are used already in application, and if you are naming you can I mention I use the REST one and SOAP one. Then basis on their thought they can ask SOAP one or REST one also. For me they ask REST one, so I was given the answer on the REST one. Explain the REST architecture style. So REST represent state transfer, and it is an architecture style for designing network application. It relies on a stateless client-server communication protocol, typically HTTP, and emphasizes the use of standard HTTP method, get, post, put, delete for performing the CRUD operation. RESTful API are designed to be scalable, maintainable, and easily accessible. Next question we have, what are the main features of ASP.NET Core Web API? We have a built-in support for creating RESTful APIs, unified MVC. We have a cross-platform support allowing development on Windows, Linux and Mac. Next we have features like middleware-based pipeline and for handling the request and response, and built-in support for the dependency injection, integrated support for the JSON and XML, support for the authentication and authorization using the various mechanisms. So these all the features make the REST API very popular. That's why very demanding in developer community and also the functional side, business side also. Next we have describe HTTP method and their purpose. This method we are using in API for creation of the method can be performed on the resources, and the main method I can say we have get, post, put, delete, patch, option head. Each one have some meaning. Get is used for the retrieve data from the server. Submit data, post means submit data to the server to create a new resource. Put, we are updating the existing resource on the server. Delete, we are removing the resource from the server. Patch, we are applying the partial modification. Option, we are using the retrieve information about the communication option available for a resource, and head is retrieve the metadata about the resource without fetching the resource itself. And in that also the interviewer was asked, can we update using the post or put? Put we are already updating, but post we are only sending a submit the data. So they ask we can do, then why we are using the post one or put one specifically for the update or for the insert? So if you want to this answer, please comment it down. I will give the answer in the comment section. Next I have, what is the middleware in ASP.NET Core Web API? Middleware in ASP.NET Core Web API is a software component that are added to HTTP request pipeline to handle the request and response. Middleware components are executed in the order they are added in the pipeline, and they perform a various tasks such as logging, authentication, authorization, exception handling, and content negotiation. Again, they ask about the like content negotiation. What is the content negotiation in that? Okay, you want this answer? Please comment it down. I will share this answer. Explain routing in Web API. So routing in .NET Core API, the process of matching incoming HTTP request to the appropriate controller action based on the request URL and HTTP method. Route template are defined using the attribute or convention based routing, allowing developer to define custom URL pattern for their APIs. Next I have how do we secure ASP.NET Core Web API. ASP.NET Core Web API can be secure using various mechanisms such as authorizations, and HTTPS, CORS, data validation and sanitization. This is a very important question, I can say. Like they are asked this question, I can say I seen multiple time, and more they are focused on the security part, how the security works in the API, how we secure our API so that our data should not be get violated. So authorization is a popular one, but again we have HTTPS. Then ask like why we are not using the HTTP, why we are using the HTTPS, or any other way we can secure our APIs. Then CORS is very also famous. Configure the CORS policy to control access to resource from the different origin. And validation and sanitization is like input data to prevent security vulnerabilities such as SQL injection or cross-site scripting. Next we have what is model binding in ASP.NET Core Web API, and we can say model binding in ASP.NET Core Web API is the process of mapping HTTP request data to parameter of controller action, method or model property, and it can say automatically bind data from the various sources such as like query string parameter or root values or request body, and form data for the corresponding parameter or model property based on their name and data types. Next we have what is dependency injection and its benefit. DI is a very popular question in every interview. You can see this is the common question they are asking, and they are also giving the example like you can create one example using the dependency injection, how you are injecting the services over there. So I written the one sample example also with the help of class A, class B I created, and class B dependency injected to the class A via the constructor one. So that is the example I provided. So you can see this is a very familiar, very popular, I can say. You have to give one example also. So DI is a design pattern and technique for managing the object dependency in software application. ASP.NET Core Web API DI is built into the framework and allow developer to register and resolve dependency using the built-in container services. The benefit of dependency injection include improve the modularity and maintainability of code, increase testability by enabling the easier mocking and unit testing, reduce the coupling between the component, making the code base more flexible and easier to refactor. Next I can say we have reduce coupling between the component, making the code base more flexible and easier to the refactor, and promote the principle of inversion of control where the controller object creation and lifecycle management is designed to a container. So this is like benefit about this in the DI. Next question we have what is the like error handling you are doing in the ASP.NET Core Web API. So we have various mechanism or technique, I can say, for the global error handling, global exception handling, middleware, use of status code, logging, error response model. So in the global exception handling, implementing a global exception filter to catch the unhandled exception and return the appropriate error response. Middleware, writing the custom middleware component to handle the specific type of error and generate the error response. Then in that they are asked like what is the filter and what is the middleware difference over there. So I was told like middleware is like we can covering the as a whole application, and filter is specifically for particular API level or particular action method level. Then use of status code, returning appropriate HTTP status code like 400 bad request, 404 not found, 500 internal server error to indicate the nature of the error. Next we have a logging error and exception to record details for troubleshooting and debugging purpose. Next we have error response model, creating customer response model to provide additional information about the error to client. Next we have explain the data annotation in ASP.NET Core Web API. So data annotation is like validation part. You are giving us some input and that input should be validated. Like if you are putting the number, mobile number, that should be have only 10 numbers, not more than 10 numbers. Like if you are putting the 15, 20 integer, so that should not be acceptable or not taken. So for that purpose, this annotation part we are using for validation purpose, and it is applied in the model property to specify validation rule like formatting option, other metadata. Like example, I can say we have a require string length, range, regular expression basically are using for like we have some credit card or some we have a Gmail validation or email validation like that, so we can use this one. So this annotation help in validating and formatting data before it is processed by the API. Next question we have, how do you perform the database migration in EF Core? So database migration in EF Core can be performed using the Entity Framework Core migration features. Developer can use the .NET EF migration CLI command or add migration and update database command in the package manager console in Visual Studio to create and apply the migration to the database schema based on the changes mode to the model classes. Next question we have, what are the action filters? Action filter in ASP.NET Core Web API are attribute that can be applied to controller action to add pre-processing or post-processing logic. They allow developer to interact or intercept requests before they reach the controller action or response before they are sent back to the client. And example, I can say we have authorization filter, exception filter, action filter, and result filter. Next question I have, how do you log information in ASP.NET Core Web API application? Logging in ASP.NET Core Web API application we can say using built-in login framework provided by Microsoft extension.logging namespace. Developer can configure the logging and providers such as a console, debug, event log, file, etc. And in the configure and logging method of startup class, logging can be done using various mechanisms like action filter or result filter also. Providers such as console, debug, event log, file, etc. And in the configure and logging method of startup class, logging can be done using the iLogger interfaces, while allow logging of messages at different log levels such as information, warning, error, debug, etc. Next we have, what is CORS? How do you enable it? So CORS is like cross-origin resource sharing, is a security feature implemented by web browser that restricts web application running on one domain from making a request to another domain. And in ASP.NET Core Web API, CORS can be enabled by configuring the CORS policy in the configure service method of startup class using the add CORS method. CORS policy can be configured and allow or restrict cross-origin request based on the specified origin, HTTP method, header, etc. Next we have, how do you implement API versioning in ASP.NET Core API. So API versioning in ASP.NET Core API, we are implementing using the various approaches like URI based versioning, query string based versioning, header based versioning, or using the custom API versioning, or what I can say ASP.NET Core API, like developer can use the Microsoft ASP.NET Core MVC versioning package to version API and configure the version option in the configure service method of the startup classes. Next we have what are the environment variable and how they are used. Environment variable are dynamic variables that are used to configure the application behavior based on the runtime environment. In ASP.NET Core API, environment variable can be used to specify the configuration setting such as database connection string, API key, logging level. These are the we are creating some key, providing the value, and that can be used as an environment variable. And they may vary across the different environments such as a development, staging, production. These are the environment. Next we have how do you use the app setting JSON for configuration. In ASP.NET Core Web API, configuring setting can be stored in app setting.json, while a JSON formatted file that contains a key value pair of configuring setting. The app setting JSON file is loaded and passed during the application startup, and configuring the setting can be accessed using the iConfiguration interfaces. Developer can use the configure app configuration method in the startup class to load additionally configures resource such as the environment variable, command line argument, etc. Next we have what is a Swagger and why it is used. Swagger is a tool for document and testing API. It is generated interactive API documentation from API metadata such as OpenAPI specification, allowing developer to explore and test API endpoint without writing any client code. In ASP.NET Core Web API, Swagger can be integrated using the Swashbuckle ASP.NET Core package to automatically generate Swagger documentation and API to expose the Swagger UI for the testing endpoints. Next we have what is the purpose of the API controller attribute. So the API controller attribute is used to indicate that a controller class is an API controller. In ASP.NET Core Web API, when applied to controller class, it enables various behaviors such as automatic model validation, automatic HTTP 400 response for invalid request, and binding source parameter inference. It also applied a set of convention for API behavior such as handling HTTP method and response, which simplify API development and improve the consistency. Next we have how do you manage application setting and configuration. Application setting and configuration in ASP.NET Core Web API can be managed in the app setting.json file, environment variable, command line argument, and other configuration sources. The setting can be accessed using the iConfiguration interfaces and can be injected into a classes using the dependency injections. Next we have what is the significance of program.cs in ASP.NET Core Web API. We have program.cs, entry point of ASP.NET Core API application, and it contains the main method which set up the host or application configured services and middleware. It is responsible for configuring the application host, logging, dependency injection, and starting the web server. Next we have how do you create and use the custom middleware in ASP.NET Core Web API. So custom middleware in ASP.NET Core Web API can be created by implementing a class with method that conform to the request delegate signature. Next I can say the custom middleware can be perform tasks such as a request processing, response modification, error handling. It is the most of the things available. It is added to the middleware pipeline using the use middleware extension method to the configure method of the startup class. Next I have what are the difference between the app.use versus app.run. So app.use add middleware request processing pipeline. It can handle the request itself or pass it to the next middleware in the pipeline. App.run add terminal middleware to the request processing pipeline. It must be in the last middleware added to the responsible for generating a response or terminating the request pipeline. So in that they are also given the one practical scenario like we have a 4 API request over there and we have to be communicate from 1 to 3rd API. How we can do it? You have to be write the logic for that, and for which cases you have to use the app.use or app.run. So you want this answer? Please comment it down, I will share. Next we have how do you handle the file upload in ASP.NET Core Web API. So file upload in ASP.NET Core Web API can be handled by using the iForm interface to represent the uploaded files in controller action parameter. The files can be received as a part of the multi-part form data request and process using model binding or directly accessing the request body. Next we have additionally developer can configure the maximum file size and other upload related setting in the startup class. Next question we have how do you implement authentication using the identity in ASP.NET Core Web API. So authentication using the identity in ASP.NET Core Web API can be implemented by configuring the identity service in the configure service method of the startup class. This involves setting up the identity option, specify the user and role identity types, configuring the authentication schemes, and enabling the authentication middleware. Once configured, the developer can use authentication attribute or middleware to secure the API endpoints. Next we have security point of view for the API related. What is the JWT and how it is used in ASP.NET Core Web API. JWT is a JSON Web Token. It's a compact URL safe means of representing a claim to be transferred between the two parties. In API, JWT is commonly used for authentication and authorization purpose. It allows user to securely transmit information between the client and the server as a JSON object and typically containing the user identifier information and additional metadata. Next we have explain the role of HTTPS in security, very important questions. So HTTPS is a hypertext transfer protocol. Is a secure version of HTTP and provide encrypted communication between the client and server. In ASP.NET Core Web API, HTTPS is crucial for secure sensitive data transmitted over the network, such as authentication tokens, credential users, and other sensitive information, and it protects against eavesdrop, man-in-the-middle attack, and data tampering. Next we have how do you use attribute routing in ASP.NET Core Web API. So they are also asked like how many types of routing in the ASP.NET Core Web API. I mentioned we have a convention and attribute based. Then they ask like how do you use the attribute routing in ASP.NET Core Web API. So this is API allow developer to define route for controller action using the attributes. This involves applying the root attribute to controller classes or action method to specify the root template. Attribute routing provide a more declarative and flexible way to define the route compared to convention based routing. Means like you have a certain method, action method, and in the square bracket you can mention your attribute over there. Next we have how do you handle the real-time web functionality, or how do you implement the social authentication. So social authentication in ASP.NET Core Web API can be implemented using the OAuth or OpenID Connect protocol with external identity providers such as Gmail, Facebook, Twitter, etc. And developer can use this third-party authentication middleware like Microsoft ASP.NET Core Authentication.Google or Facebook like that, and configure this authentication option and handle the authentication flow of the external provider. Next, for the real-time web functionality you handle. So real-time web functionality in ASP.NET Core Web API can be achieved using the technology such as SignalR. SignalR is a library that simplifies the adding real-time web functionality to applications like WhatsApp, and by providing the bi-directional communication between the client and server, and it allows user to push content from the server to connect client instantly, enabling features like chat application, live update, notification, etc. Next we have how do you implement the global exception handling. So it is a very easy one. .NET Core API can be implemented using the middleware or filter. Middleware can be used to catch exception globally and return appropriate error response. Alternately, a developer can implement an exception filter by creating a class that implements the iException filter interface and registering it globally. So there are asked difference between them also. So use the service.add MVC options, .filter.add exception filter method in the startup class. Next we have what is the difference between the iActionResult and ActionResult. So iActionResult is an interface representing the result of an action method in ASP.NET Core Web API, and ActionResult is a base class that implements the iActionResult, and the main difference is that ActionResult provides additional helper method for creating various type of action results such as OK, bad request, etc. Where iActionResult is an interface that defines the contract for all action results. This is the difference. Next we have how do you optimize the API performance. This is a very important question because any API you are creating, if your performance is not good, then there is no use of the API. We are creating the API because of the performance. We have to utilize or increase the performance. So we can implement caching mechanism to reduce the database or computational overhead. We can use the asynchronous programming to improve the scalability and responsiveness. Then we can say optimizing the database query and reduce the data transfer. Then we have minimizing the payload size by using the compression technique like czip. Next we have implementing rate limiting and throttling, prevent abuse and ensure fair uses of resources. Like we have a 3 maximum frequency. After that you can't hit those API. Then we have utilizing the CDN to service static content. Then we next have profiling and performance testing to identify the bottlenecks and area for the improvement.